Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Punch, Kick, Choke Chat. My name is Sean Benson. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm so happy to be here tonight. I literally was just laughing so hard in our pre-chat that I exited the call. So if that happens again, the great news is that there's four of us helping run this thing, and that'll be just fine. I just want to say, if you're watching us on YouTube, we really appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. If you're listening on one of the podcasts on any of the podcast platforms, that's awesome. But if you're watching on Zoom tonight, you get to be a live part of this show. And that means you get to ask questions of our guest or of all of us. And then we'll make sure our guest is a part of the answering. And in a little bit, Andre's going to throw that button up for you. But every week it falls on me to introduce Sensei Nicholas. Oh, he did it. It's at the bottom. So our Zoom guests, we really appreciate you being here with us in real time. And that's your ability to ask questions of our guest tonight, which is super awesome. It's the benefit you get by being here with us. Sensei Suino is one of our hosts, and he was actually our first ever guest on the show, which is so phenomenal, over 60 episodes ago. So we're really taking a trip with this show, and we thank you all for taking it with us. I give the basic palmaris of 8th Dan in Iaido, 6th Dan in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, 6th Dan in Judo. And I was really thinking about your cuts, Sensei Suino, because you were up here a couple of weeks ago, and you know we talked a lot about grappling and the Jiu-Jitsu, and that was fun for me. But it's still that Iaido, watching you pull that sword and do those cuts. And I actually tried to teach class to my students last night the way you talk about having been taught, which is I would do a kata, they would do a kata, I would do a kata, they would do a kata. And so I reminded myself about your style, peerless, direct transmission. And it was really amazing watching my students grow last night in a way that felt special and different. And part of it was that I was honoring you with the way I taught last night. So how you doing tonight? And thanks for giving me guidance in my lesson without maybe even knowing it last night.
Oh, thanks, Sean. Doing great. And as always, I really appreciate your intro. It's so interesting that you mentioned that, both Sensei Del Fan and Sensei Larioza have been at my permissions event. And one of the stories I tell is how it was for me to study at the home of my Iaido teacher, Yamaguchi Sensei. It's the one time in my life more than any other time when my cup was completely empty. I stepped in the most open-minded state that I've ever been in. And I don't know why, but he and I gelled. If he had said, go play in traffic because it'll make your Iaido better, I would have run out and gotten hammered by the first car.
Right.
So there's something about coming to the table with that level of, in a state, in the right state, that really helps you learn. So I was really blessed to have that opportunity. Thanks for
passing it on to us.
Yeah, and I love hearing that. It was so cool to train with you guys not that very long ago, and I'm hoping we can reprise that soon. Awesome experience. When we do the show, it falls on me to introduce Sensei Randy Del Fan. Most of our regular listeners know him very well. They know he's a 7th Dan in karate and a 4th Dan in Iaido, multiple time kata and kumite champion around the world, and just a great human being. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed over the last year or two is just watching how much he lives into this idea of thinking first about whether something is good for karate, and then whether it's good for the association, and then whether it's good for the dojo, and only finally, maybe even after thinking about his own students and the people around him, and he thinks about himself. And he's walked that forward in a lot of things that we've done together, and also with Hanshi Legacy. And of course, Sean, you know that as well. I'm grateful for our association, Randy. How are you doing tonight?
Good, Sensei. I have a question for you before we get started.
Sure.
Saw a very interesting picture and read some comments. Saw a picture of a Suba and something about Miller, Sensei Miller. And I'd like to know a little bit about that picture, and then maybe people will go hunt that picture down and ask more questions about it. What was happening there, Sensei?
Well,
you said if you know, and I know, but other people don't know. So
there may be 5 or 6 people in the world that know. So among our top Iaido players, we do something called Boken Fencing. If you get very, very good at Iaido, we let you put on eye protection, and then we take bokens, wooden swords, and we fence. The reason you have to be very, very good is when you screw up, it really hurts. I've had a boken in the back of Dan Holland's eye socket. I've had softball size lumps on my head. But we have a playful rule, and that is once in a while on the boken, there's a tsuba, a plastic handguard. And once in a while in the midst of the battle, it'll fly off. Well, our rule is you can't go pick it up and put it on your own sword. Someone else in the room, usually the person you're sparring with, has to pick that up and throw it to you. And you have to try to hold your boken out. And for 20 years, we've been trying to have it so that the tsuba flies just the right way, lands on that boken and goes in. Well, it's insane. Like, there's some things in life that change your world, right? Like you could live the whole life and that would never happen. You always thought, man, that would be magic if it did happen. Well, on Tuesday night, it happened. I was doing some work with Miller. The tsuba flew off and he threw it on and it went right on the boken. Absolutely stunning, astonishing. One time in 20 years. And I really don't expect it'll ever happen again. So yeah, thanks for asking. That was freaking amazing. We went nuts. And one of our students, Konomi, is this lovely Japanese woman who is pretty new to that whole part of things. And I'm sure she was just as confused as you could possibly be about what was going on in that moment.
That's awesome. Thanks
for asking. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Sensei. I saw the picture. I knew that the tsuba had been thrown and somehow it had ended up. I wasn't sure if it was on your boken or Miller's boken, but I appreciate the context now. And I hope people go hunt that picture down on the JMAC Facebook profile or on your profile.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to introduce Sensei Legacy, and then I'm going to introduce Sensei Sam Larioza. Sensei Legacy is the 10th Dan. He was awarded that by his teacher, Sensei Anthony Sandoval. Lots to talk about Sensei Sandoval this weekend. Sensei Legacy and I were away and we chatted about Sensei Sandoval repeatedly. And it was great to spread his knowledge and his legend. Sensei Legacy is also a member of the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. Again, we were in Ottawa this weekend with I think 7 or 8 people from the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. That was pretty cool as well. Sensei Legacy is an author. Other teachers who he's trained with have been Harold Warden, Benny Allen, Richard Kim, and also Sensei Suino. He's a student of Sensei Suino's. And if you're wondering about the Ottawa thing, there's something coming out soon from Hanshi John Tarian. It's called Ring Talk with Hanshi John Tarian. And Hanshi Legacy was a guest on that. And I got to sit on the outside again, that's kind of like this podcast. I got to sit in a chair off on the side while these two were talking in the ring with cameras on them. And interesting, if you want to hear some more good stories, you'll pay attention to that podcast when it comes out. I think it's starting next month in April, and there's going to be one a month for 12 months. So, and Sensei Legacy is one of the guests. Other guests are people like, former world champion Daryl Hannigan, former champion of the universe, Jean-Yves Theriault, right? people like that are that's the ilk that are on that. So that's my introduction tonight for Sensei Legacy. Also to just say, I really enjoyed that alone time with Sensei Legacy on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It's just super nice to be in the car alone, driving. So many laughs. I mean, we laughed so hard so many times. Nobody will ever know those laughs. And it was just fun to do a bunch of stuff with Sensei Legacy again together, that alone and personal. So that's my intro for Sensei Legacy. And now I'm going to introduce Sensei Sam Larioza. I am a big respecter of higher education. And I want to point out first and foremost that Sensei Larioza is a graduate of the US Naval Academy, which is not something that everybody can claim. I don't think anybody we've talked to can claim that. He started his martial arts training in 1992 in Morio Higaonna Sensei's karate dojo in San Diego. Since then, Sensei Larioza has earned his Shodan in Okinawa in 1998. And he was awarded his Sandan and Goju Ryu Karate in Higaonna Sensei's dojo in 2005. And I'm not going to make the same mistake I made last time. I'm making an assumption that Sensei Larioza is higher ranking than that. But as all good karateka, you can't find his highest rank anywhere. He just doesn't advertise it or promote it. So maybe, Sean, you can just write that down as a question for the conversation. So Sensei Larioza has traveled and trained and studied in a wide range of martial arts, not only karate, but also Chinese Wushu, Shotokan Karate. He's trained in Tae Kwon Do. He's done Krav Maga. And also, we were talking about it before, he's actually also done Okinawan Shorin Ryu, which is the style that Sensei Legacy and I do, and Sensei Benson. He's the owner and chief instructor at Ohana Karate. He opened that dojo in Michigan and called it Ohana Karate in 2003. And he has now the largest, most successful martial arts school in Livingston County with over 325 students. I met Sensei Larioza at Permissions, and I could tell you the first introduction was great. Like, he's a very warm, open person, really willing to engage and chat with you. It's really clear that he's open and friendly and extremely intelligent. I went snooping around and I looked on his website. And one thing that he said that on the website, when you're sifting through things, is that parents ask you to help raise their children. And I think as martial arts teachers, that's a really cool thing to read from a sensei, like, because you are actually helping raise those kids. And it made me think of when I got married. My stepfather stood up and asked Sensei and congratulated Sensei Legacy and thanked him for helping to raise me. And it made me think of that when I read that. But, you know, some of the core principles that Sensei Larioza tries to help kids with are poor grades, getting ready for kindergarten, i.e. an uncomfortable situation when you're young. So shyness, lack of control, that would be me. You would have been helping me with that. Bullying and bullying, right? So, and one thing, I guess a final thing, Sean, before I'm going to send it over to Sensei Suino, but a final thing I want to say is when I started snooping around his Facebook profile, something stood out to me as I was looking at his Facebook profile. And it made me remember when I saw him first, he always smiles. When you see him, he smiles at you. And when you look at the pictures on his Facebook profile, he's always smiling. And not only is he always smiling, all the people around him are always smiling. And while Facebook is not a real thing, it's often superficial, I don't believe so in this case. I believe that when people are around Sensei Larioza, they feel better about themselves and they feel happy. And his smile is genuine and it's infectious, and other people smile too because of him. And that's a great thing. So welcome tonight, Sensei Larioza, and I'm going to just punch it over to Sensei Suino for a minute.
If I was going to add anything to that, and I hope we talk a lot about Sensei's martial arts training, but I suspect something else will creep into there. We met some time ago through a mutual acquaintance, Dan Vigil, who was a Tae Kwon Do instructor in this area. And we started a kind of a mentorship group what do you call that? A mastermind group. And I think I have learned as much or more about the business of martial arts and helping people grow from Sensei Larioza as anybody. And that may surprise him to hear, but you know, every year or so we connect, we talk a little bit. I visited his dojo, he's visited mine, and I have a hefty handful of things, advice, Sensei, that you've given me or quotes that you've said that help inspire me. And I think they've really made JMAC a much better place. So I hope some of that creeps into it. And I suspect it's very hard to talk to Sensei Larioza about martial arts and not have that stuff creep in. So I'm just hoping that that does in fact creep in. And if it doesn't, you can be sure I'll be wedging my way into the conversation.
That we look forward to that, Sensei Suino. You know, I wedge away. I'm just going to do a quick bit of housekeeping, Sensei Larioza. So first and foremost, we are sponsored by World Martial Arts Live, which is coming back for the second online festival. That's what I call it, June 18th. And I'm going to throw that to Sensei Do Fan. So they're sponsoring us tonight, but also we have a seminar coming up that I know you might want to mention as well, Sensei. Do you want to chip in about either of those things?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Like I'm pretty happy about that. So Sensei Suino and I and Sensei Legacy, I've talked to them in the past about, you know, what are the goals? And actually, like Sensei Larioza and I were talking about this before, because it was at Permissions about 3 or 4 years ago that I was very intentional with him about some of the goals that I had in martial arts when it came to I want to have a professional dojo. I want to have instructors here who can lead classes. Those things have all happened. But one of the things that I had said was I wanted to start working on bigger events that help to keep the community of martial arts together, bring instructors together, get people together. And one of the things we did during the pandemic was World Martial Arts Live. We did that with Hanshi John Tarian and World Kabuto and JMac and Legacy Shorin Ryu. And it was huge. We had 94 instructors over 24 hours. And yeah, 4 instructors an hour for 24 hours. And we're going to do it again. And one of the things that's been pretty cool about that is that most of the people who did it the last time, as soon as we said we want to do it again, they just instantly were like, let's do it. They were like the instructors, all the people were, and I said it last time and I'll say it again. It's a pretty cool experience. You know, a kid in Mexico might not have an opportunity to train with a Japanese sword master, but they can on World Martial Arts Live, right? You can, for us, we've had guests on this show that we met on World, like our last guest, Mike Wall, Sensei Mike Wall, right? Like I trained with that guy on World Martial Arts Live and I was like, this guy's a total badass. And I'm super excited that we're going to be doing it again. 14th, 15th here in Kitchener at the University of Waterloo. Legacy Shorin Ryu and World Kabuto are putting on, we got like a top-notch list of instructors right now. That's right away. As soon as the instructors were agreeing to come and teach, I was like, this is pretty cool. So we got Sensei Suino's coming, Sensei Legacy's coming, Hanshi Tarian's coming, Hanshi Sai's flying in from Belgium to instruct. Everybody's favorite karate person, Sensei Copeland's coming up to teach. Ben Lidasur, world kickboxing champion, heavyweight world kickboxing champion, he's coming to teach. Mike and Laura Civic, total badass Kabuto people. Scott Bauer, 9th degree black belt. James Fries, Adet Rice, they're all coming. We're gonna probably have somewhere around 200 people on the floor. 5 mats going every hour, 4 hours a day for 2 days. And it's gonna be crazy good and I can't wait.
Fantastic. And then the last thing I do want to say before we jump right in is, you know, you're watching this, you're watching 5 adults have a conversation. If you don't like any of the language, if you don't like any of the tone or the tenor or the points of view, look for the similarities, not the differences. We're all in this together. And if you leave an hour and a half chat with a bunch of karate folks on it and you don't get some idea that you enjoy or thinking about, I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked. I'm just going to leave it at that. Sensei Larioza, how are you tonight? What's going on?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm delighted to be here. That introduction, I gotta honestly say, kind of touched me because it was probably one of the best introductions I've had, I think, ever. Because I can't believe how it was from the heart, from both Suino Sensei and Dolphin Sensei. But again, I'm honored and I'm actually humbled to be here because I saw the list of the guests you've had in the past. I'm like, wow.
Well, we're happy you're with us tonight. It's really great to be able to do this with you. And let's just jump right into our Kickstarter, which is, what was it like for you growing up where you were? Tell us a bit about that. What led you to your first dojo and what kept you there?
Sure. Yeah, I'll tell the story. One of the things, maybe the reason I smile so much is sometimes I got to pinch myself when I look back, how lucky I was. Growing up, I had a really interesting childhood. My parents were immigrants from the Philippines. And so I was first generation Filipino American. And what's interesting is, and my father was in the military. So my life was very similar to a lot of people. There were first generation Americans and also a military child. So when both my parents came over from the Philippines, they didn't know each other and they met here in the United States. And my father got in through the Navy and my mom was a registered nurse. She came in through a program that was bringing in Filipino nurses. They met, and then of course, I was born actually in Boston, Massachusetts. And what's pretty typical of military families is we moved every 2 years. So I was born in Boston, and then from there I proceeded. Every 2 years we moved. It was crazy, and we'd always go East Coast, West Coast. So I went from Boston, and I think we went to Long Beach next, then Norfolk, Virginia, and then Alameda, California, then Newport, Rhode Island. And for the first 12 years of my life, we were back and forth between the different coasts. Wow. And it was interesting because later on I asked my parents, I go, why did we do that? And come to find out, the way it works in the military, the farther you move, the bigger your moving allowance. So we wouldn't just move from Virginia to Rhode Island. We'd have to go from Virginia all the way to California. That was wild back then because now the school systems are fairly standardized. Back then, it would have been in the 70s.
Wow.
The schools are very different. Like California was going, high tech. And I remember it really affected me school-wise because I'd go from basically almost a red brick schoolhouse in Rhode Island. You go to California where they were way ahead. And I know where it really messed me up was in cursive writing. Remember learning cursive writing? I was in a school in Rhode Island where we hadn't learned it yet. And all of a sudden I moved to California and all of a sudden they've already done cursive. But anyways, that's kind of what I went through. It's interesting being an immigrant, a first generation, and I know a lot of people will be able to identify with this who are. When you're a first generation American, your parents are trying to turn you white. In other words, they're trying to do away with all the things, because what they want to do is they want to become Americanized as quick as possible because they want to circulate into society. So I think first generation Americans all share this, where all of a sudden you lose your identity. You're like, wait, I'm brown, I'm Filipino, but we don't speak the language, where they try not to let us eat the food. So the whole time you're being turned white. And you'll see how this fits in later with the martial arts. So anyway, that's kind of a dilemma because you go through life kind of with a dual identity. You're like, you're trying to be American and white, but then you're like, wait a minute, I can't live a lie.
Right.
So anyways, going through that, I was really lucky because in high school, for my high school years, my parents decided to take a duty station in the Philippines. And I have a brother and sister. And at the time, we were just crying. We're like, oh no, we don't want to go to the Philippines. We thought, no running water. We'd be wiping our butts with banana leaves, we thought, oh my, mom and dad, what are you doing? You're bringing us from the United States. We're going to go to the Philippines. And we were kicking and scratching. We were crying. We didn't want to go. But lo and behold, it's one of the best things that ever happened because I was there. First, I lived on, if you're familiar with the military bases in the Philippines, I lived on Subic Naval Base for the first 2 years, and the last 3 years, which would have been my sophomore, junior, senior year in high school, I was at Clark Air Force Base. This was back in 1972 to 77. If you remember what was happening right then, that was towards the end of the Vietnam War. And if you look at a map of the Philippines and Vietnam, they're friggin' right across the ocean from each other. So those bases were we used to say it was like the Wild West.
Wow.
You had all these soldiers, airmen coming in, going out of Vietnam, and these guys would go into Vietnam and go. They could die the next day. So you can imagine the mentality of that base. You had these guys filtering in and out. And I remember the good thing for me, I was just a little bit too young to be drafted. Because I didn't turn 18 until like 1977. So without actually going to the war into Vietnam, I was about as close as you can get without actually being there. So anyways, I grew up there in the Philippines, and it was the best of time. It was one of the best things I ever did because it was a blast. Because living on a military base, and you look at Okinawa and Japan, when you live on those American islands, and that's what they really are. They've got everything. They have a dairy. They have their own dairy. They produce all their own, everything. So it's like living on an island. And I loved it. And the schools are great. And so anyways, I did really well in school. That was probably one of the gifts I had. I was just really good at math. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do in life. I thought I was pretty immature when I was growing up. But my math grades were pretty good. I did really good on the SAT, ACT. And then lo and behold, everybody who was there, because we were all military, everybody applied for the military academies if they had good grades.
And sir, let me just ask real quick, just because as we're getting to a bit later, are you developing or being given from your parents a martial mindset, or are you just kind of bopping around doing your thing and that's for them? Is that something you're thinking about at that age?
Yeah,
graduating high school,
like martial arts.
Even if not martial arts, like, military mindset, are you thinking, is that inherent in how you're living, or are you just kind of bopping around as a teenager having a good time and your parents are taking you from A to B?
It's funny when you grow up as a military kid, one of two things either happen. Either you love the military or you hate it.
Right.
It's like one or the other. But the thing about it, you don't realize it. And I think you don't when you're a kid, you don't realize that it's abnormal. It's an abnormal life. You think you think everybody lives like you, but when you live in the military, especially you're around bases and whatnot, everybody around you is military. Like I remember what was really cool was in the high school I went, we never had any bad kids. And the reason why is if you're in a military base in a DOD school and you're a kid who's like a bad kid, you know what happens? The principal just calls a commanding officer of your dad's unit and basically says, you got to go ship, you got to ship back to stateside. So yeah, that's what they would do. So there were never any discipline, but that's just how different it was on a military base. But as far as, I think when you grow up in a military base, whether you like the military or not, you're one side, it's just a part of your DNA that you just can't get rid of. Mm-hmm. Military people think differently. Everything's on time. You lived a very disciplined life. Like you ever meet a kid whose parent was like in the Marine Corps? They're different, but they have something in common.
Right on. Thanks for that. Yeah, that's really interesting to me.
Yeah. So anyways, so I got selected for the Naval Academy, and I got to honestly say it's probably, I had to pinch myself. It's probably one of the most significant things in my life that changed my life forever. I didn't know much about it. When I got over there, boy, was it an eye opener. I knew about the military, but as you can imagine, unlike most of the military, our boot camp was basically a whole year. Most boot camps are 4 weeks, 6 weeks, but for the Naval Academy, and the other thing about Naval Academy too, I'm kind of rambling on here, but it's very steeped in tradition. And you'll see how that relates because I don't know, I just love tradition, because while the world is changing and innovating, I think what happens is traditional organizations or traditional cultures kind of keep our feet grounded. Mm. And that without that, we're flying in 50 million directions and we lose the value of, the relationships you have with people and who you're with. But anyways, so I get over there and here's the real eye opener is, you go to a pretty good high school and you're like in the top, 10%, 5%. And you go to a college where all of a sudden everybody is top 10%. And all of a sudden you think, oh, I was pretty good, but now I'm like bottom of the barrel. So, and I was around some amazing people. Some of these guys were just natural leaders from the start. Some are older. The other thing that was interesting while I was at the Naval Academy too, is I entered in 1977. The Vietnam War ended in 75. Well, after the Vietnam War, we had a bunch of POWs that came back. Well, they were still active duty. So when they got their treatment after being held captive, the Navy didn't quite know what to do with them because they were thinking, are these guys stable enough to go back to combat, whatever. So you know what they did? They put them in temporary duty at the Naval Academy. So while I was there, guys like John McCain, like John, Lawrence, some of the POWs who were just amazing were there. And I remember they would be there and they would tell us the stories of leadership. And wow. Can you imagine? Here's what's interesting. You're flying off an aircraft carrier. You just had a steak. You were just watching a movie. You get shot down, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, these people that are trying to kill you, and then they throw you in a prisoner of war camp, and you're being tortured
for years.
Yeah, but here's what's interesting. You go from in your flight suit on an aircraft carrier to all of a sudden you're shot down, and now you're a captive, and you're being tortured. And those guys had the lead under those. And the reason why it was incredible is because you study leadership at the Naval Academy. Talk about the most, what do you call it, trying way to lead. They didn't have to lead. Okay, they're being tortured. Matter of fact, the Vietnamese, they would try to knock down anybody who was a leader. If you tried to be a leader, they'd knock you down. They'd torture you extra. So these guys, under these conditions where they were being starved or they were being tortured, but what they did was, to a man, they all stepped up and said, I'm going to lead, even though I'm in this prisoner of war camp. So anyways, they kind of gave us that inspiration of, how do you lead? How do you
Wow.
lead in a situation like that? And every one of them came back. It's interesting, if you talk to any one of them, we'd ask them, if you could do it over again, do you wish you hadn't gone to the prison of war? Do you wish you hadn't been a prison of war? And every one of them said to a T, no, because it made me a better person.
Wow.
Even though they were tortured, and the stuff they had to go through was just, unimaginable. So anyways,
So, I was just going to say, before you hit the martial arts world, you're being prepared for the type of things through the military aspect, through the leadership's aspect. It's no surprise that you flourished once you entered that world.
yeah, and you know what I really find, Sensei, is that the more and more I do the martial arts, the more I find so much in common with the military in so many different ways. And really, if you think about it, especially American martial arts and the military are intertwined because of because of the soldiers and sailors and airmen that were stationed in Korea and Japan and Okinawa.
So what made you
Jocko Willink says that all the time, that outside of the military, the only people he can associate with are martial artists. That's it. That's the only place he can find any commonality is with martial artists.
You know what I tell people all the time, especially adults that join us, if I know they're military, all I have to do is say this. I go, remember when you were in a combat unit? I go, you get the same feelings in a good karate dojo. And they instantaneously go, and then when they feel it, they go. And that's why military people sometimes love a dojo, because it feels just like they're in a military unit again, that camaraderie. It's that, what they say is, when you're in the military, especially in combat, you don't fight for the flag. You don't fight for your country. You know what you do? You fight for the guy next to you. And, there's something special about that. When you know the guy next to you, and you can feel this in the dojo, when the guy next to you, you know that they would do anything for you they could. And you trust them, just 100%. You ever get that feeling in a dojo sometimes, especially when you get close to somebody, and
who can know what it's like to get punched in the face super hard or knocked unconscious, other than somebody else who's been punched in the face and knocked unconscious.
That's right.
So Sensei, then what led you to finally go, I'm going to walk into a dojo. I'm going to put this into something martial arts for myself.
Sure. Yeah, this is funny. I always say the martial arts guys have always been good for me. It was interesting. One note is when I was in the Philippines, Bruce Lee was huge. I mean, everybody was Bruce Lee. Everybody was Bruce Lee Gaga. I never realized when I was in the Philippines, because Bruce Lee was so big, that the Filipinos had a huge tradition in Eskrima and Cali. I never knew, because when I was there, everybody was, so enamored by Bruce Lee. So needless to say, although I was Asian, I really didn't know much about the martial arts. I kind of had a passing interest. Oh yeah, that's cool. But it wasn't like I was early on going, oh, I'm studying everything and, buying books and buying videos. The way I got into the martial arts was really kind of interesting. It wasn't until I was like 31, that was 10 years out of the Naval Academy. And what I was doing was I was transitioning from the military to civilian life. I got out of the Navy, and I really wanted to, get into the business world. So it was one of those things where I was starting a new career. I had a family, and one of those things where because of time and stress, I wasn't working out. I was always used to being on team sports, and how you just get to a point where you're like, okay, I just don't feel good physically. So at that point, I said, okay, I need to do something. And it's interesting, because a lot of people look at me as a very disciplined person, but I always say, I need somebody yelling at me. I need somebody yelling at me. I mean, don't you think that's true? You need somebody yelling at you. So it was interesting. I was living in San Diego. And so I go, okay, and I want to do the martial arts. So in San Diego, you go into the Yellow Pages, and there's like 2 friggin' pages of martial arts studios. I mean, crazy. I mean, so different than out here. Out here, you've got, 6. So anyways, so it was funny, because I didn't know anything about martial arts at all. So I just go through and I just start visiting places, and a lot of places I X'd off. And it's kind of funny. You know how sometimes you walk into a dojo and right away you walk right out? You just know by the way it feels. A number of them were like that. And of course, I went through a ton of dojos. Some of them were, very commercial, where all of a sudden you felt like you're in a timeshare. timeshare selling thing. And so one of the dojos I stopped at was Higaonna Sensei's dojo, but I didn't know who he was. And what was really funny, in a stroke of luck, when I went there, it was actually closed, because every year they have a huge festival / tournament, and they just so happened to be at that tournament at that time. And it was really funny because I look in the dojo, it's nothing spectacular, it's dark, and I was almost ready to wipe it off my list because there were so many to go. But then something made me come back. So I come back to that dojo, and I didn't know who Morio Higaonna was, but I knew something was different about his dojo. I just felt it. So what was funny was, when I was there, Tetsushi Nakamura, who's now the chief instructor for the IOGKF, he took over for Morio Higaonna. He was actually his assistant at the time. So when I walk in the door, me knowing nothing, he did my introductory lesson. And then that's how I started there. And it was really funny because for the longest time, I really didn't even appreciate who he was. I remember when I was there, we'd be like, I and my fellow white and yellow belts, we'd be in the dressing room, and we get people who would come in from all over the world. So we're sitting there in the dressing room, and these two Russian guys are talking to us. They're black belts from Russia, and they go, you guys don't know how lucky you are to be training here with Higaonna Sensei. And me and the other white belt look at each other like, you mean that small Asian guy out there? It was literally like that. And it wasn't until after I left his dojo that I really started to understand, who he was. But anyways, I was really lucky because really my first day in the martial arts was in a class with Morio Higaonna Sensei.
Yeah, just like us, people say, white privilege, you had karate privilege.
Yeah.
Right from day one, you had karate privilege.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I didn't realize it or appreciate it right away. But little I know, and of course his classes were tremendous, and he's a phenomenal teacher. And the other thing too is, what was really good is we had so many good black belts, and as a yellow, white belt, orange belt, the best thing was training with those guys, because the worst thing is sparring with a yellow belt. A yellow belt sparring against a yellow belt, because someone's going to get hurt. Okay. but those black belts were so good to us because they had such good control. They'd scare the crap out of us, but they had such good control. And we did a lot of sparring, and I always loved sparring the black belts because they'd come so hard at us, but we knew that we were safe with them, but they'd scare the crap out of us.
So talk about how long you trained there, but also what was it, you came to find out what those Russian gentlemen were talking about. So talk a little bit about what those classes were like, what did make them special, what made him special, if you don't mind spending a moment on that.
Sure. Yeah. To me, he's a very special person. I always like to say he's the reason why he did so well in the karate world. I think he's a freak of nature. And I think anybody who's a genius is. Here's the one unusual thing about him. He friggin' loved training. He could train for 6 to 8 hours a day. I mean, he wouldn't just train, 2 hours every day. Every day he would go 6 to 8 hours. I think he was one of those kids when he was growing up, it was the typical where, he had problems in school. His mom was always, getting on him because they couldn't control him, lots of energy. But he was just the perfect person to develop into a great karate master, for sake of a better word. But that was him. And you should see, you'll love this, Sensei. His body conditioning was friggin' unreal. He didn't punch makiwaras. You know why? Because he'd break them. You know what he would do? He'd punch concrete pillars, and he'd hit rocks. And then, when you see his arms, you're like, holy cow. I remember one time he demonstrated something on me, and he caught me by surprise. I remember his forearm came across the back of my neck, and it literally felt like a telephone pole with a little bit of leather on it. It was, the Muchi heavy sticky. He has that developed so well. It's amazing how much power he has in his body. But again, watching him condition his body is just, it's not even human. I don't know if you've seen any videos of him. Yep. And the training was lots of basics, tons of basics. We did a lot of sparring, and the coolest thing, the training was always very physical. I remember one of the one of the things I'll always remember is there in his dojo, whenever we train, you know, they got the windows in the front. And every time we train, it would just get completely fogged up and get fogged up to the point where it condensed and there'd be drips of sweat coming down the windows. And I always thought that was the coolest sight. We were like, okay, it was a good one today.
Love that. And what was the tenor of the sparring? Were you guys padded? Were you not padded? Was it pretty hard? Was it pretty, you know,
It was,
how that?
yeah, it was pretty hard. In Goju Ryu, or in his dojo at least, they didn't do any point sparring. It was all irakumi continuous sparring. And usually we wore protections on our hands, but the hitting was pretty hard, especially when you got up to black belt. I mean, I don't know if you watch like Kyoshinkai fighting, it was continuous. And it's funny because there wasn't a whole lot of defense. It was all lots of offense. It was like pounding and lots of really hard leg kicks. So that's what the sparring was like. And the black belts were really good because I remember there was this one really cool black belt that really like, he would tell me, he goes, okay, I'm going to only hit you in one spot, which is in the middle of your chest. He goes, I'm going to spar you, but I'm going to only hit you in one spot. And so we'd be sparring and you'd be trying to, you'd be trying to protect yourself. You'd be trying to hit him, and every time, boom, hit you in the middle of the chest. You're like, damn. So, but the other thing that was interesting about Higaonna Sensei was his English was very bad. And the more he got away from speaking English, the worse it got. So the interesting thing about him is he didn't really explain much. It was just like train. As a matter of fact, his motto was listen, sweat, and hit. Basically, there wasn't a whole lot of explanation. I think, I think when you look a lot at the way that the Japanese and the Okinawans especially teach karate, there's very little explanation, and you're almost taught the culture of the dojo is almost like you don't ask. And it's just, you will learn because when you do it 10,000 times, you will learn it. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I actually wouldn't mind using that as a chance to crack this open and go around the horn a little bit. So, I'll go Sensei Suino and then Sensei Legacy and then Sensei Do Fan. But we talked about, and then back to you, Sensei. We talked about this in the opening when I introduced Sensei Suino, is the idea of, the peerless transmission without talking as much, and just, I'm going to do it, you're going to do it. I'm going to do it, you're going to do it. So Sensei Suino, how much talking do you need to do versus just show, do it, show, do it?
It's a great question. I certainly teach with my voice a lot more than my teachers in Japan did for me. And didn't we have a guest on here recently, right? The outcome of the whole conversation was shut up and train. I think it's certainly possible to do both, but I know I probably err more on the side of explaining than I used to do. But at the end of the day, I don't think martial arts is something that's it's not verbal, it's physical.
Anchi Legacy?
Well, I agree that in order to get better and to progress, you must train more than standing around talking. But there's a thing about what Funakoshi said. 75% of your martial arts as a student is your sensei giving you the information, and 25% of it is you putting it into practice. Because there's a lot in martial arts. If you just concentrate on just doing one or two things, you may be good on a very narrow stretch, but you need to learn more all the time. And it has to be, you have to have a sensei in order to learn that full spectrum of martial arts. But actually getting down and doing it is what makes you better. I agree with that.
I love talking about this. Sensei Do Fan?
I think, like, if I think of my relationship with Sensei Suino or Sensei Legacy, I think initially there was a lot of explanation and a lot of talking. The last time I went and trained with Sensei Suino, and it was Sensei Suino and Sensei Miller and Sensei Holland, just the four of us were just on the floor. There was zero talking, like literally zero talking, other than announcing the cut and then doing the cut. So that, I think, is the direct transmission part. trained White Crane with Sensei Legacy last Tuesday. Very little talking other than we're going to do this kata next, and then you just kind of do it. Right. So, but that wasn't the way it was when I started karate. Everything was explained to, like, you know, and not only was it explained, I was able to question, which I think is one of the things, right? Like, I think if we're talking about Sensei Larioza, because Sensei Higaonna's English was so bad, you probably can't even ask questions. So you're not even in the you don't even have the opportunity to put your hand up and say, I have a question. You're just like, I just got to be quiet and figure this out. Right. So, but I think generally speaking, in the beginning, there's more talk and then there's less talk. But the one thing I want to say about the direct transmission piece is your relationship needs to evolve. I've learned as many things off of the dojo floor from Sensei Suino and Sensei Legacy as I did on the floor. The whole impetus of this show is because I used to sit in the back seat of a car quietly and just listen to Sensei Legacy talk to somebody else. Right. And so I guess that's what I feel about direct transmission. Direct transmission is the things that you learn that weren't intended to be taught to you, but you learn them anyway because of the space and time that you were in. And you need to spend a lot of space and time with those teachers for you to learn those things on through osmosis, right? Like resting your head on the textbook every night and just sleeping with your head on the textbook. And then all of a sudden, you know, physics. Right? Like,
I love what you just reminded me of, is the idea of that back seat, because listening, whether it's physically while moving with my sensei, or whether it's literally just listening to the words, is very different than what I call a conversation. And listening, making up the bulk of it, feels right to me, even if it's listening to an explanation. Sensei Larioza, do you want to put a button on that, or do you want to chat about that topic at all?
Yeah, I was thinking as I was in terms of when I teach too. What we have is mainly a physical skill. There's a little bit more involved, but there's mainly a physical skill. And what I find is the word feel. In other words, what we do a lot of times, I think you need to know what it feels like. So, for instance, when I'm explaining something to somebody, I almost want to cut to the chase and not explain and go, here's what the technique feels like, or here's what the movement feels like, And so I think a lot of times when you can't describe, you can't talk about a technique that they're going to apply, you almost have to kind of show them, let them feel it. You know what I mean? More teach you feel like, what do you call it? Your movement, your muchimi. If you try to describe those in words, you can spend hours trying to describe it. You'll never get it.
Yeah, I love that, Sensei Larioza. That's Sensei Legacy says all the time, karate's a feeling.
Yep.
All the time he says karate's a feeling. And when I think of somebody and I watch a student and I'm like, they're not doing it right, often it's not a technical thing. I watch them and I think, I don't think they feel the same way that I feel when they're doing that stuff, and they need to develop that feeling.
Love that. And also, 25 years ago, one of the guys on this call, Sensei Nick McLaren, the first person to make this arm go dead. And the person at the bottom of my screen, Sensei Suino, is the last person to make this arm go dead. And we need to feel this. We need to make sure this works. And there was no conversation while we were deadening one another's arms. There was just finding the nerve or not finding the nerve. Sensei, I just want to jump left for a second, go to a question, and then I'm going to throw it back to Sensei Suino to nudge us back in the directions he wants to make sure we don't miss. But Robert Schlumsky, who's one of our PKCC, he's one of our guys, and he's not with us hosting tonight, but he's online, and he has a question for you. Can you talk about being a plant-powered sensei and the connection between diet and martial arts? He's taken that from your Instagram handle.
That's more my wife.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for catching that. I gotta give credit to my wife because she's always a great, promoter or whatever. But that's really from her. What it was is it's funny because my wife is wonderful, and a lot of people when they meet her, they think, and it's funny because she'll go to like doctor appointment, whatever. She goes, "Are you a medical professional?" Because she's one of these people that she's not a medical professional, but her hobby is like researching stuff on the internet, right? And there's so much there. But anyway, she really is huge on nutrition and health. As a matter of fact, she runs a great program. We actually have what's called a Rock Steady program during the day, people with Parkinson's, I don't know if you're familiar with that, they found out that a non-contact boxing program can actually either slow down or stop the progression of Parkinson's disease. There's no cure for it. So anyways, she's always been this type of person who's really big on, okay, everybody always goes to her for medical advice. And I'm like, you got to be careful, you're not a doctor. So anyway, she got really big on nutrition and about a plant-based diet. And I think a lot's been published on that. So she kind of got me going on that, lost a ton of weight, but it was really her that kind of got that publicity for plant-based sensei. She goes, this will be a neat name. Why don't you? So that was all her doing. But I had a great time doing it. And it really, I know you can probably, everybody can probably appreciate this, but as you get older, all of a sudden, all these things about what you eat, how you exercise, how you had, when we were young, you could do anything, right? You could eat any crap you want. You could kill yourself, but now, because I'm going to turn 63 this year. A lot of people don't believe it, but all of a sudden I'm like, holy cow, you start to appreciate that everything, little thing you do to your body really makes a difference. And I really notice I'm really affected by what I eat. The big thing on inflammation, that certain foods, certain things. And I don't know, as I've gotten older, so that's kind of like the direction that I went with. She kind of helped me a little bit and go, hey, let's eat a little bit better. We want to live a bit longer so we get a chance to see our grandkids.
And are you finding the benefits? Are you going, wow, this is really working? Like this is me now.
Yep. And it was really funny because here's this really weird. Filipinos, I love Filipinos. Filipinos have never met a pig they didn't like. We're like big pork eaters. I mean, the Filipino diet is bad. It's high in salt, high in fat. I don't know how Filipinos live as long as they do. So when we first went on, I'm like, no, I was eating meat every finger meal. I mean, you're talking about, 22-ounce steaks. And I'm going, man, I don't know if I can do this. But I went on it, felt the best I ever had. And here's what really threw me off. After I'd been on it a while, I ate some meat and I almost felt nauseous. And I'm like, what happened? I could eat like a half a cow, But it was really weird that I was really shocked and especially like for some reason, poultry now, I can't eat poultry. It's like, it just turns my stomach. So isn't that kind of interesting?
Yeah. The moral I'm taking away from this is don't stop eating meat. You'll love this. There's a place called Restaurant Depot. It's down there by Ann Arbor, and I'll go down there because they'll sell a side of pork belly with skin on, like a 30-pound piece. I'll go down there, and it's like, the worst thing for you. But that's how much of a carnivore I was. But it really has made a difference. What you
Amazing. Even gut health alone. I mean, if I got a sore knee, I can do most things. But if I have my guts off, everything sucks. Like everything sucks. And I'm probably the youngest guy in the call as I hit my 40s. Like my gut just went, nope, you need to fully rejig. I still eat the meat, but I think it's something really important. And Robert, I don't have your answers and no one on the call does, but for everybody listening, hunting down the diet that works best for you, and you might need to reevaluate in 5 years, is as important as how many kicks you throw tonight, I believe. Because you can't throw the kicks if the diet's off.
I thought you were going to say hunting down the meat you eat.
Hunting down that too. Well, on that note, Sensei Suino, why don't you nudge us back into another direction with Sensei Larioza?
Well, he's sort of already done it. He mentioned his Rocksteady boxing program. One of the cool things, I don't know how long we've known each other. I've got to feel like it's 20 years now. And early on, when I first started JMAC, I went up to Sensei Larioza's dojo a couple of times and watched how he taught. But what's really interesting is every time I go up there, I'll go up there with very specific questions in mind. How do you teach this in karate? Or, what do you do with your billing system? And he almost never answers those questions. He almost always gives me questions to think about and then tells me about what he's doing. That's light years ahead of anything I ever thought of in terms of developing character. Like it's not lip service up there. He actually has thought about and systematized, probably going back to Naval Academy days, right? Or military way of thinking, has systematized building character into children and adults. one of, you know, and giving back to the community. And one of the ways is with the Rocksteady boxing program, which is a great way to fill the daytime hours in a dojo, right? All of us business owners, right? We have that maybe hour in the morning, maybe an hour at lunch, 2 or 3 hours at night. That's all you got, unless you take on something like that. So I'm just, I would love, Sean, for you to ask a few questions about the business side of martial arts and the, I know we're going to get in a little bit into the benefits of martial arts training outside of the fighting and the physical, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Great. So why don't you just start us off, Sensei Larioza, and I'll chip in as we hear some cool ideas.
Sure. Yeah, I think a good place to start might be, you know, when I started my dojo and why and how. It was really, again, luck again, because, you know, I was living here in Livingston County, and, you know, my wife, wonderful wife, but I thought there's no way in the world that your wife's going to let you go and do a karate school for a living. You know, it's crazy, right? What wife would say, hey, why don't we start a karate school? You know, so I never thought that I would ever have a karate school. I never did. My mind was set on it. So then one day my wife comes home. We live in a really small town. She goes, hey, Sam, I found a perfect building for your dojo. And I had to look at her and go, what are you talking about?
That's a great wife, man. You found a keeper. You keep that woman forever.
It was just funny. I wanted to go check her forehead because I thought maybe she was ill or not feeling good. So when she said it, I was kind of like, what? Because I thought there's no way in the world she's going to let me do this. Because she comes from a middle class family. She was big into security. You got to have that 9-to-5 job and stayed at the same company for 30 years. So I thought there's no way. So anyways, before she could change, I was joking about it. Before she could change her mind, I go, I leased the place. Okay. And this is funny because maybe about 2 years later, the dojo's going gangbusters. And she looks at me, she goes, and this shows you the difference between men and women. You know, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. She looks at me, she goes, I thought you were just going to do this as a part-time, kind of a hobby thing. And I looked at her, I go, wow, were we different? Because from the first day I said, no, this is going to be a big successful dojo. And the reason why I just tell this story is because growing up through the martial arts, I'd seen way too many people struggle financially with dojos. And nothing's worse than the stress of you can't pay the bills, or you're in a negative cash flow. I mean, that's got to be the worst thing in the world, not just for a dojo owner, for a business owner, because every day you're hemorrhaging. Okay. So I said, okay, if I'm going to do this, I don't want to, I mean, I love the martial arts and I want to do this for students, but I don't want to be struggling. I don't want that stress. So I said, just like we do for the martial arts, I want to be a student of business. I go, if I'm going to open a dojo, I need to be there's two sides to a dojo. There's the business side and there's the martial arts side. And I go, some people do one and not the other, and some mess up both. So from the very start, I said, I want to learn how to do this right. I was really lucky because the one mentor I had, I don't know if you know a guy named Greg Silva. Greg Silva was, he was part of the, let's see, he had what was the name of his organization? But a lot of guys, he had a mastermind group, but he spawned a lot of guys out of there. But that's who I basically learned a lot of my principles from. And the good thing about his organization, it wasn't just a fly-by-night or a bunch of, hey, we're going to make a ton of money. The people that were with him were just genuinely good people. They were good martial artists. The thing that I loved the most is they barely know you. They'd invite you. I remember one guy, R.S. Mitchell, out in Maryland. They barely knew you. They'd invite you in. They'd tell you everything about their dojo. They'd show you all their systems. And, this isn't a world where normally martial artists are very competitive and we all hide what we have. We don't want to share what we do. But anyways, that's how I kind of learned the martial arts business. And from there, I said, okay, I'm going to make both sides work. I go, you can have great martial arts and you can still have a thriving business. Luckily, I had a little bit of a business and sales background, and it helped me a little bit. So where were we going with the question? What was the question?
Sensei just wanted to open it up to that side of what you're successful at. And I actually want to add a question there. So let me use my one of my students who's a black belt as a hypothetical. He's in Toronto. He wants to open a dojo, or anybody else on this call. And by open a dojo, I mean the business side of it, not work another job. What are 3, 4, 5 things you'd say out of the gate? these are the things you must be sure of. These are the things that will let you not teach Tuesday, Thursday night, but actually be that guy.
Yeah, oh, great question. Well, that's a big one. Number one, I would say is don't reinvent the wheel. The one of the big principles I learned in business is copy, 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 copy. You know, you have a lot of people who could come up with a great idea, you know, the next, I don't know, the next rocket ship or whatever. It's like, don't do anything that's too out of the box. Do what's already proven to work. So if you were starting a dojo, find a dojo that's a successful dojo, highly that's just like the one you want. And then do everything you can to meet that person or meet people like that. And you need to find mentors. I think a lot of martial artists, they do it on their own. They think, okay, here's it. I have great martial arts. They will come. You know, it's like I would build it. They will come. And they think that they can just open a place and just have great martial arts. But what you got to do is you got to have a model and systems that you can copy. And because you know, you guys run dojos. There's a lot more than just opening your door. There's accounting. There's advertising. There's, you know, customer service. There's, you know, the billing systems. There's so much involved, and normally that's the part that none of us like, right? We don't just want to get on the floor, but you got to be able to copy all those systems, and then also to use professionals. Like, you know, a lot of people won't use a billing company. They won't use a what are some of the other accounting system? You know, you need to outsource everything that you're not good at. So that's number one. I would say just copy, copy, copy. The other one is understand why you're doing it. What's your why? Why are you doing it? Because everybody's why can be different, and they're not good or bad. Like your why might be you just want people to train with. Your why might be you want to change you want to contribute to the community. Your why might be you want to be the best dojo your why might be you want to just produce the best fighters in the world. But I think when you have that why, it gives you direction, because you can't be everything to everybody. You know, what's the why of your dojo? Why do we? And I think for most of us who've been doing this a while, we know that. But when you're first starting out, it's like, you know, why are you doing it?
That's really awesome and super helpful. And what you're talking about with that why, it's like you're automatic, without calling it your niche, you're creating your niche. You're creating your unique, you know, value add to the community.
Yeah, and kind of just kind of along the same line. I think I told Sensei Suino Sensei. I think the number one thing once you get those two underway is what's the culture of your dojo going to be. So your culture, you're going to have a culture one way or the other. It's just whether it's intentional or whether it's accidental. And if I had to say the one thing that's really helped us succeed here is from the very start, our culture was very, very clear. The way I like to talk about culture, it's two things. Culture is a group habit, and it's whatever group you would like. Like for instance, I came from a culture. The military had a very clear culture. You see anybody in the military, you know the cultures. Naval Academy has a specific culture. A dojo or the martial has a culture. So that culture has to be very, very clear. And then everything we do revolves around that culture. Another word that I like to use for culture is, and I love this saying, this is just how we do it here. This is just how we do it here. So when and the stronger your culture is, the more, the more unique or odd. Like we do a lot of things in the karate dojo that aren't done anywhere else. You know, if a person walks in off the street, they're like, why do you take off your shoes? Why do you bow? Why do you speak Japanese? You know, why do you treat each other this way? You know, everything we do, you know, to putting on your gi, to tying your belt. So if you think about all of that as culture, and if you have a good handle on, intentionally creating that culture, you'll create a powerful, not just a dojo, but any business organization, or even, like I always say this, the Marine Corps has a specific culture. That's what makes the Marine Corps so great. You know, the SEALs have a specific culture. And I think that's one of the most powerful things we can do in our dojos, because the martial arts is really, it's all about that strong culture, whether it's, you know, in the dojo or, you know, with the style that you have.
Love that. Thanks for that. So we're going to jump to our 10 questions, and then there's some ideas I want to come back to, but I got to make sure we have time for our 10 questions. One day this sheet, I want this in like the Smithsonian of martial arts. This is our goal with this show, is for this sheet to be that important one day.
Only
So
you could read that sheet.
I
Sean.
guarantee you I can read this. It's so clear to me. So Sensei, we ask you to answer as impulsively as you can, but then expand on your answers as you wish. What is the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
That's interesting. Because the biggest thing is that we were never big into tournaments. Higaonna Sensei wasn't big into tournaments. I would say I love Oraken, the back fist, because I find that when you're trying to generate power, because your hand is so relaxed and the back of the hand is so powerful, I just love the Oraken, the back fist.
Who is the most influential martial artist in your life?
Oh, that's an easy one. Higaonna Sensei, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, by far. Because I've done some other martial arts, but my base was always Goju Ryu, and Higaonna Sensei has always been my sensei. But one of the highlights was getting my Shodan there in Okinawa. That was a dream come true.
Who do you believe is the most influential martial artist of all time, and why?
I'll try something a little bit different. It was like what I was talking about before. I think the most influential martial artist, especially to American karate or martial arts, was really the military, the servicemen. That I always think of, maybe because I know them so well. I go, if there hadn't been an overseas presence of the U.S. military, the texture of the characteristics of American martial arts would be so different. Because if you really look at it, a lot of the martial arts in the United States really was patterned after these guys who were military. They were military guys. The way they ran their dojo was just like a military. And really, when you go to a lot of dojos, especially the previous generation, now it's kind of good, but generation before us in the United States was heavily, heavily, heavily military.
Hope it goes back that way.
What's that? Is it?
Hope it goes back that way.
Yeah. How about in Canada? I was always curious about that. And there are a lot of Americans that were, you'd have this young 18, 21-year-old, and they're stationed in Okinawa or Japan or Korea, and they, runny nose, they'd go into a dojo and they get the crap beat out of them and they'll love it and they bring it back. Did that happen in Canada?
Well, Sensei Legacy's instructor is a Marine who was stationed on Okinawa for 18 years. So. Sensei, did you want to say something about that? Sorry.
The United States has been a great source for us. And I do believe it's from the military to Marines, etc., the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy. Yeah, like the United States has been a great place for us to learn. I've did a lot of training in the United States. As far as being on the same par as the influence on the Canadian Army, I don't believe it was quite the same.
Yeah.
Even though I'm reluctant in saying that, I'm not quite sure. I have never gotten it from Canada. I've always went to the United States.
Yeah. An interesting thing, and I just saw this recently, was the nature of the military was the army was typically stationed in Korea. And in Japan and Okinawa is primarily Air Force and Marine Corps. So as a result, almost all the Army people that came back were either Hapkido or Taekwondo.
Huh.
Chuck Norris.
And then almost all the Marines and all the Air Force were typically karate.
That's an amazing observation. Yeah, I actually have thought about that, but not. You're a military person, so it's interesting to hear you say that, right?
Because there's not many army stationed in Okinawa or Japan, but they're all in Korea.
Right. Who's the most famous karate person in the United States who is an army person is Chuck Norris. What's his base? Korean martial arts, right? Robert Trias, George Alexander, Anthony Sandoval, like these people were all Marines. Karate, not Okinawan karate.
That's so badass.
Sorry,
Sensei,
Sean, we sidetracked your 10 questions.
This was great. It's actually why I wanted to get into them before the end. Sensei, what excites you most about the next 5 years of your training?
Gosh. Well,
it's okay if you want to say you want to train with us. That's okay.
Here you go. That's another excitement. I look forward to that. Next 5 years. I think here's the honest truth. I don't know. I've been doing this for a long time now, but I never considered myself a great teacher. And I'd say it's more in the recently that I've become better at it because I have to work so hard at it. Honestly, I don't think I'm a natural teacher. I think I really have to work at it. Maybe that's good. So I would say that especially in the last couple of years, but I'm looking to the next 5 years because I think I've just touched the beginning of when I could. And what's the best way to put it? I'm like, for the first 10 or 20, 10, 15 years, I'm just like struggling through, just mumbling through, just doing the best I can. And I think I'm finally getting to a point now, okay, I think I know I think I'm starting to know what I'm doing. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. I think in the next 5 years is becoming a better teacher. And there's a lot to that.
Well, Sensei, you might not know this if you haven't watched the right episodes, but Hanshi Legacy once determined that 30 years is the point at which you're considered a serious martial artist. So it makes sense that 30 years in, you're starting to go, I think I'm getting this.
Okay, well, it's good to know I've got that validation.
You've gotten serious this year.
Almost all of us on this call are there. Almost all of us.
Wah, wah, wah.
Nothing.
2023, you elude me.
Got to put in the time.
Got to put in the time. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get there?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the biggest for me is you made a difference. You made a difference. And you know what? I think we're very lucky because, we have to think in terms of we've got these dojos and we have an open door, an opportunity to just change people's lives. Like you look at a lot of people in other occupations. How many occupations have that? Not a whole lot. Teachers maybe. But here's what I always say too. A teacher might be a teacher of a child for maybe 1 or 2 years. A coach might be a coach for maybe, 2-3 seasons. But as karate instructors, we're in a unique position where we may teach somebody for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And we may teach kids as young as 3 all the way till they become, adults. What other profession does that?
A great question. Do you have a favorite film and television martial artist?
I'm not big in it. Yeah, Bruce Lee. I'm not. I don't know. It's funny because I wasn't. You see these kids all the time who were fanatics about watching every martial art. I wasn't that type. So I'd say Bruce Lee, but I wasn't really big into watching a lot of martial arts films.
Is there a martial artist, living or dead, in all of history that you would like to train with the most?
Yeah, I'd love to just pick his brain too. Is Chojing Miyagi, and he's the founder of Goju. And I would say here's what I think about him is, it's weird because everybody, especially in the Goju world, is tradition. Don't change anything. Don't change anything. Don't change anything. Yet he was the one who was the biggest innovator. But people don't realize it. He created new katas. Can you imagine? You're in the traditional world, and some guy goes, "I'm going to create some new katas." It's like, but I would have loved to talk to him because he did so many things, like bringing it into the high schools, and also too, you think about the time when he taught. He taught just before and during and just after World War II, and talk about trying to teach. I was marveled at looking at the films of the Battle of Okinawa. What the Japanese and the Americans did to Okinawa was just amazing, and that he lived and he really tried to help the Okinawan people get through that time, and karate was the way he did it.
Thanks for that. If everyone in the world could have the greatest benefit you've gotten from martial arts, whether they do martial arts or not, what gift would they be getting?
Yeah, first of all, I think one of the gifts is, and I think one of the powers of the martial arts is the people you're around. I think, something about people who are really into the martial arts, there's a bond there, and there's a relationship there that's very different than almost any other relationship you have. And again, I say it's very close to the military. It's very special. As a matter of fact, when I left Higaonna Sensei's dojo, I kind of looked for a place to train, and what kept me coming back to all the gashus and training was I just couldn't leave the people. I just kept wanting to come back, and it was almost like, and every time, even though we hadn't seen each other for maybe a year or two, it was like coming back to family and like you had just left them yesterday. The other thing I think the martial arts does, which I think we can do, is I like to call it the edge. You know, and I'm sure you guys have all had this, where you have an emotional experience where you get pushed to the very edge, physically, mentally, emotionally, absolutely tapped. I know, you know, and I've had it happen in some other parts of my life, but I find that we can give people an experience that takes them to the edge of their being. They get such a rush, you know what I mean? You know, have you ever trained so friggin' hard or been in a grade and it was so friggin' hard and you're like, I can't move another muscle, but then you keep going, or you're about ready to throw up? You know, I call those peak experiences. And I think what happens is when you have those peak experiences, they not only change you forever, but you remember those experiences. And what's, I think, neat about karate, and I've experienced it, but also I'm able to put them on, is to create those peak experiences, peak emotional experiences for people. That's what keeps us alive. That's what juices us.
Yeah, it does.
Sensei Suino does one of those. It's called the Crucible. And Sensei Legacy does one. It's called a black belt grading.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, but that drives people.
The last two questions come as a pair. What is your greatest achievement and greatest regret?
You know, I have to say my two kids. I got two great kids. I'm really lucky. My wife is phenomenal. But I think it's great to see my son is 29 and my daughter's 32, and they've just grown to be amazing people. You know, so I think that's what I'm most proud of. My biggest regret, I wish I'd started karate earlier, because I started when I was 31, and Higaonna Sensei was there between 1985 and 1995. Now, here's the thing. I don't think I would have ever it's interesting because people ask me, because I always think, you know, I think it's because I'm Asian. They think I've been doing martial arts my entire life, and my dad was a kung fu master, right? Because you're Asian. Kind of like if you're 6'10", you're a basketball player. But I don't think I would have wanted to take martial arts when I was a child. I think it would have been different. I'm glad I did it as an adult. The only thing is I wish I'd taken it about 5-6 years earlier when Higaonna Sensei first got to the United States.
I hear that. I think we'd all have liked to, well, maybe Sensei Suino, I don't know, not. Which, just Sensei Suino, do you wish you started earlier? Or did you pretty much got right about it? Like, do you care about the extra 6 months you might have got out of it?
Well, I started at 8 years old, right?
Yeah.
Boy,
Yeah.
I wish I had worked harder at it. It's not a regret, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wish I had taken it more seriously, more hours of the day. Maybe I wish I had Higaonna Sensei's constitution. Although I have to say, when I was in Japan, I often trained 9 hours a day. So
yeah,
it's you don't have to be superhuman. You just have to be passionate.
That's
crazy.
It's
Crazy.
cool
Crazy.
question, right? Like for me personally, I don't think I would have got anything from starting earlier. Like I started when I was 18, but before I was 18, I did lots of sports. I ran track, I did boxing, I played football, I lifted weights, I did all kinds of stuff. I think coming when I did was the right time for me to come personally, like not earlier.
Sensei, I agree with you. And, you know, I just wish I spent more of my 20s, my late 20s, especially more dedicated. But 18 was a great starting age. And my ballet background prepared me nicely for moving in karate.
Yeah. It's not when you started, it's what you did after you started.
That's a great way. Hanshi Legacy, do you wish you started earlier?
Well, it was good for me. The things I did before, I had a bit of a rough life, and I think that I was more ready to face the toughness of martial arts than most persons at my age at that time, just because of that. You know what I mean? I had a rough teenage and early 20s. And then I needed karate. And because I needed it, once I found it, I held on to it like it was, my life depended on it. And believe me, it did.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, other than my guitar, there's nothing I've maintained from my pre-teen, like karate and whatever years. Everything else was like, whatever, you know, I took it for granted. Sensei, Larioza, I want to ask you a question. And we don't have a ton of time, I'm sorry to say, because there's so many ideas I want to crack open still with you. But you know, you've had that time in Okinawa. And how do you look at Okinawan on the ground arts compared to the USA arts? You know, you were taught by an Okinawan instructor in America, but then presumably you went and worked with other people who are American only. So how do you perceive that? Is there a difference? What's the difference? Does it matter?
You know, first of all, I think all martial arts are great. I think a lot of times we get caught up into this, you know, which art is better, which, you know, and I think that we as martial artists have to get away from that, because it's not good or bad. Everybody has good or not so good. Probably the biggest thing that I really started to realize as I started doing more Okinawan karate is the difference between Okinawan and Japanese karate.
Mm.
The huge, and because initially I thought, hey, Japanese, Okinawan, they're kind of the same, right? But the more and more I go deeper into, and also too, I'm a Shodan in Matayoshi Kobudo too. So the weapons, because if you go to Okinawan dojo, there's no weapons dojos like karate dojos. They're the same. They're both in there. But what I find more and more is the interesting. I find it intriguing, the difference of Okinawan and Japanese karate and the evolution, because you know it came from Okinawa first and it went to Japan. And the interesting thing is the Japanese, rightfully so, put their spin and their culture on their karate. And when you really look at it, the karate of Japan and the karate of Okinawa are very different. It's almost as different as Okinawan karate and American karate, or Okinawan karate and European karate. Like if you look at karate in South America versus in Europe or the Eastern Bloc, I don't know if you guys have ever trained with those guys from the Eastern Bloc. They're friggin' nuts. But I'm really intrigued by the difference between Okinawan and Japanese karate. Yeah, that's right. They're brutal.
Could you name a few differences?
Well, like for instance, the katas are completely different.
Mm.
The katas are different. The range of fighting, and I can understand why, because you know, like for instance, Shotokan. Again, I'm limited in what I know in the other martial, but Shotokan is more linear, longer distance. You're moving in. Goju Ryu is trapping distance. It's like you're right there touching somebody, and all the techniques are short techniques. Mm. What's interesting is although the Goju Ryu practitioners are really, really heavy hitters, you know what they're really, really good at? And people don't realize this until that you really get moving. They're phenomenal movers, because in order to get close in successfully, you got to get there in the first place, and you got to be great movers. And so when I go to Okinawa and I see some of these old masters, they may get a little bit, you know, they may lose strength, whatever, but they're so fast, so good at moving. And I've seen demos where you had this, you know, this 70 or 80-year-old guy with a 30-year-old black belt, and he's wiping the floor with the guy because he's so fast at moving. And you would never think that, because you think Okinawans big, stocky, they just want to punch the crap out of each other, but they're really good movers.
I'm not sure if it's what you're describing, but you know, when the boxers are in tight, those little drop steps, the footwork is small but so significant.
Yeah, well, it's like in Suino Sensei. I mean, like in judo, the footwork in judo.
It's everything. It's everything. Yeah, you have to be able to move well. Well, if there's such a possibility, you're even closer in judo than you are in Goju, right?
Yeah. Well, you think it's not just brute strength and throwing somebody.
Hopefully not at all. Yeah.
The last thing I've written down before we're going to go around the horn, Sensei, and by around the horn, I just mean we're going to start with Hanshi Legacy and, you know, just say a little something about our time with you. But I wrote down, based on Sensei Del Fan's introduction, rank what the fuck, ? Exclamation mark. So what's the deal with you and rank? You don't mention your rank, is that right? Or it's not important to you, or is that just something that?
Yeah, you know, it's you know what you remember how I told you I was fighting with my identity of, you know, Asian, and one of the things that I found out, and I do this with people, is if you're that Asian looking to get back to your heritage, the martial arts will do that, because everything we do in the dojo, everything the Okinawans do is just like the Filipinos do. So anyways, the thing about the rank is this, is Higaonna Sensei always had this culture of, you know, it's not about you, it's not about your rank. So it's not that I don't want to put it out there, but it's not like I write it on my check. It's not like I put it on my bill. Matter of fact, if you look at my website, there's nothing about me, because I don't know, it doesn't need to be about me, because we do what we do really well here, and it's, you know, I'm a Yandan in Goju Ryu. I'm a actually it's funny, I'm a second degree in Taekwondo. I don't tell most people about that, just joking. And then I just got my Shodan in Mate Yoshikamoto. But to me, it's like it's always the way I was raised. You know, the best way to say it is that's how I was raised. My father, my karate father, was Higaonna Sensei, and Higaonna Sensei didn't care a crap what your dan rank was. You know, you just get into the ring and you start pummeling each other, and you train hard. And so so to me, it's never been about rank, and I find that I don't even like to talk about it much, because to me it's who you are as a person, not what you wear as a rank.
I love that. There's that great Hanshi legacy.
Well, being a military person, imagine the military without rank.
Yeah, but here's what's interesting, that that's great, Hanchi. Like, I'll throw this at you. You know what's interesting about true leaders? They don't need a rank. I mean, in fact, if you need in other words, if you're a great leader, it doesn't matter whether you've had, you know, a bird colonel on your shoulder, or whether you've got stars or whatever. It's like, when you know a leader when you see one.
Well, that is true. You still need order.
Yeah.
It's a tool for keeping everything working properly.
Yeah.
So whilst it may not be important to you, like I'll never get graded again, but I really don't care about that. But you know, there may be an 8th or a 9th dan who is looking for someone to follow, and hopefully it sort of says a little bit about your practice of martial arts, and you know, somebody may need that. While again, personally, yes, if I threw my belt in the garbage, I would still be the same person. But because it's martial arts, the military way, we need some sort of structure.
Sure.
And you know, it's just a thought, my thought. That's all.
I heard the saying, you know, it's like a pack of wolves. Even though a pack of wolves, they know who's the alpha dog.
Mm-hmm. But we're humans.
Yeah, Hanshi, that reminds me, when it was my 6th sober birthday, I said to my sponsor, I don't really want to take a cake this year, you know, feeling a little humble this year. And he goes, it's not for you. It's for the guy with 4 years who wants to see somebody who's got 6, who knows that it's available for them.
Yeah,
Thought
I
that was
like that,
interesting.
Sean. When you say that, it reminds me of when Sensei Suino says, you fight your way to 3rd dan, and then the others are something else. I often say, everything after a 3rd dan isn't for me, it's for you.
It's cool. Fuck, this is a good chat. We got to go though. So Hanshi Legacy, why don't you start us off around the horn, and then we'll end on you, Sensei Larioza, and then we'll do a little bit of housekeeping and say goodbye.
Sure.
I learned a
Hanshi?
lot. Okay, I've learned a lot of things from you about how we should look at our martial business-wise, etc. You've given me some to me personally, some very important information about karate do and karate jutsu. That personally, to me, that was very pleasing. And find out you're a very well versed and grounded human being, as far as being a martial artist, that maybe some of those, I could pick up some of those attributes and use them myself. It was nice to meet you, and hopefully at some time we can meet face to face.
Thank you. I hope so too.
Sensei Suino? Thanks, Hanshi.
I always enjoy the time I spend with Sensei Larioza. We've spent time in mastermind groups. We've had meals together. I've been at his dojo. He's visited mine. It's always really enjoyable. I took a ton of notes, but I'm just going to share one thing that Sensei Larioza said to me some years ago. I don't remember how early in our in our acquaintance, he said this. He said, one of the most powerful things a parent can say to their kids is, I really loved watching you do karate today. And it turns out that's true. And not only does it turn out that that's true, but you can say the same thing to adults and it's meaningful to them. And you can say the same thing to employees, and it doesn't have to be about karate. Being present for somebody is one of the most powerful gifts you can give them. And I never even thought about it that way until Sensei Larioza told me. So that's a gift you gave me many years ago, and I've never forgotten. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Sensei.
Thank you.
Sensei Del Fan?
So listen, Sensei Larioza, I'm going to tell you something. Oftentimes, when we have these chats with people, there's chatter in the background that people don't know about. And I will tell you tonight, there's been almost zero chatter. So what I mean by the chatter is that we're texting each other, we're messaging on Facebook. Tonight, I only had a lot of thoughts, like what you were providing led me to think about what you said, and then it led me to other thoughts. And this has been a great conversation. So things that I took away that I've learned about you and that I've learned myself is, you know, you're a military kid who went east, west, east, west, east, west, Filipino background. I didn't know that. Really interesting. I never really thought about when you're a first generation American or in any nation and your parents chose to come there, they try and make you white. Or I imagine that's similar in other places. If people bring their kids to other places in the world, they want to try and assimilate to that place. That's an interesting thought. That's going to help me in my work and in my life a lot. Like just thinking about that one thought. I can't imagine being in the Philippines during the end of the Vietnam War. That's something. Yeah. It's interesting when we talked a lot tonight about the traditions of the military and the traditions of martial arts and how they kind of mesh. And I always felt that, but you're one of the very first people who really articulated it really well tonight. And I was really happy to hear that. You know, I said karate privilege. You didn't know who Higaonna Sensei was. And it's like, I say that all, my daughter is the one who says that to me about karate privilege. She's like, you know, I just grew up thinking that everybody had access to people like Sensei Legacy and Sensei Suino, not realizing that I was one of the very few lucky ones who could have that. And if anybody takes something away from this podcast, I hope that's one of the things they take away. Higaonna Sensei, that he trains 6 to 8 hours a day. That's awesome. That reminds me of some people I know. His English was really bad. That reminds me of when Sensei Benson was training with Hidetaka Nishiyama. We went there once. I couldn't understand one word that came out of his mouth when we were there. But still kind of interesting that you just got to get in there and do it. Our talks about the feeling of karate. I also want to say that your wife, like, you're blessed to have a person like that who would support you. I have finally found that in my life. I know Sensei Suino has that in his life. You really can't do what we do if you don't have a partner who's like all in with you, right? Or you're always going to be torn between your passions of your wife and this thing that's drawing you all the time. So good for you, and congratulations to your wife for supporting you in the way that she does. Student of business, copy. The one thing that you said as well, like outsource what you're not good at. I think that's a really powerful statement for a lot of martial arts teachers. They stand at the front. They feel like they're like the one, they don't want to show any weakness. I think that's a good lesson for martial arts teachers to take away is outsource what you're not good at. There's some things you're not good at, and just don't try and be good at it. Just be good at what you're good at and let other people do that other stuff. What is your why? I really like when you said the culture of your dojo, it can be intentional or accidental, right? I like to think it started here accidentally, but then became intentional, right? Like as we figured it Back fist. Most people say reverse punch, but I really like hearing the back fist. That's definitely in my top 5 at least. Why are you laughing, Sean?
Because this part of my body's very aware that it's in your top 5.
Okay. I like that you think that the military servicemen were the most influential. I've never thought about that before, but I cannot argue that in any way. I think you're 100% right about that. It's cool that you think in the next 5 years you're looking forward to being a better teacher, and that God, if you show up there, would say you made a good difference. Those similarities, I wrote this down, same mud, same blood, right? Karate people kind of have that same thing, right? Like, how can you know what it's like to get punched in the face and have a bloody nose if you've never been punched in the face and had a bloody nose? You can't, right? Give people the experience that takes them to the edge of their limits. Like, that's such a good statement. And one thing I want to say to you, Sensei, before we turn it over to you, or Sean and then you, is, you know, you were 31 when you started karate. Other people were different ages. I want to share with you that I got my black belt with a person named Jim Christian, and he was in his 40s when he started karate, and he's still training, and he's on this call right now. And he's a great martial artist. Jim Christian is an amazing martial artist. I look up to him in so many ways. And another person I want to mention is when I was 18, I joined at the University of Western Ontario, and karate was, Sensei Larioza was a karate instructor there. And Kenny Ibu Suzaki joined, and he was a biology professor, and he was 61 years old, and he trained until the day he died, and he was a 4th degree black belt when he died. And there's no week in my life that goes by that I don't think about him and be grateful for him. So it's not really about the age. It's about what you do once you start, not when you start. It's once you start, what do you do from that point forward, not when did you start? And yeah, so thank you so much for tonight. I can't wait to see you again. I know I will. That's the exciting thing, is I know I'll see you again.
And I just want to say really quickly before I throw it to you, you know, I just love the way you talked about the culture. This is the way we do it here. And that creates very unique spaces, you know, and it's a beautiful thing to either choose it or just to know that, no, this is how we do it here. And that becomes the culture. Chicken or egg, it's a wonderful thing. And then, you know, this is a little bit more what Sensei talked about in the intro, but we got into it a bit. Just when you talked about the idea that you could have a karate teacher for 40, 50 years, it was just such a great, you know, mine are on this call. And so the gratitude I feel for that, and also the responsibility I feel as an instructor who could be that for someone, that perspective you put it in is massive. Like, I still think about my ballet teacher, and I was with her for 9 years, but I'm with my teachers I've been with for almost 30 years right now on this call. Literally, it's a beautiful thing. So thanks for that. And thanks for putting that in perspective. What do you want to go out on before I do one last bit of housekeeping?
Sure. You know, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I didn't know what to expect, but you know, what's interesting was the time went by so fast. But you know what I will do, and Suino Sensei knows this. I love quotes because it says, the saying is that in a quote is a condensation of, you know, tons and tons of wisdom. But the one quote that I always go back to and guides me so much now, especially the more I do this, is this. I don't know if you ever heard this before, but we don't teach karate, we teach people. You ever heard that one? We all get into, oh, we're teaching judo or teaching karate. It's like, no, we don't teach karate, we teach people.
Thanks, Sensei. So I just want to say thanks to Robert Schlumsky, thanks to Mike Russell, thanks to Victoria Feth, Justin Shea, Alden Adair, and tonight's man behind the scenes, Andrei Sedyshev. Those people are why you know when the shows are, or why the computers are up and running. Yeah, they literally work the servers in Silicon Valley. They're that good. We don't have a show without them. And I'm going to throw it to Sensei Del Fan to tell us about our guests for the next few weeks and to say goodnight for us.
Okay, so I only have 2. We're working on a couple right now, but Lauren Bernard is coming up, Wei Crane Kung Fu practitioner from Quebec. Sensei Legacy and I had dinner with him on Saturday. Really good guy. Also, super passionate about motorcycles. So, you know, like,
I love that.
it's gonna be a good conversation when they like motorcycles and martial arts. We haven't done a host chat for a while, so we're gonna be doing a host chat soon. That'll be on the 21st. And then, yeah, we're just working behind the scenes to get a couple of other people, and I'll be
Awesome.
excited to announce those ones when they can happen. And then
Awesome.
don't forget about our events, please. Like, I'm looking right now. I see Sensei Copeland's on this call. I see Dan Holland. I see Doug Knispel. These are people who are going to be here teaching and training with us on the 14th and 15th of May.
Yeah.
If you have any questions about it, just reach out or go on our website, because all the information's there. You can get hotel information. All that stuff is there. So
Love that. And just for everyone watching, you know, we're all working so hard in Sensei Del Fan, especially on getting these guests in order. And we do have those events coming up the 14th and 15th, and the World Martial Arts Live on the 18th of June. And so, you know, maybe we get 5 extra guests, or maybe you come to those events and you actually get to work with the guests, which is, you know, I recommend both, but definitely make sure those seminars are at the top of your list. If you're like, when's the next PKCC? It might be in person.
it's a good point, Sean, right? Like, we do these PKCC chats and people are like, oh, they talk a good game. Well, get your ass out on the floor.
Get your ass.
You're going to see Sensei Copeland's going to put his right hand on your face. Sensei Suino's going to hit you with the earth, and Sensei Legacy's going to stick his finger deep into some part of your body that you didn't want.
You didn't even know was part of your
I'm
body.
sick that weekend.
Well, that's a great note to go out on, everybody. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. And we really look forward to that. Thank you again, Sensei Larioza, for
Thanks,
your time
everybody.
and your incredible
Thanks, Sensei
perspective.
Larioza.
Thank you.
Great
to see you.
night.